it's the reality what are the needs that they have. If we look at the operators, they are looking for better solutions, they are looking for the excellence in their services, having more profits, having better providers, and of course, if we look at the vendors and the service providers, they are looking for making business. So if we talk to the government, what they want is to have a better society, well protected, and so on. In Spain, we have something like 3,600 critical infrastructures identified. Of all of them, 80% are from private companies, 20% are public. So one of the biggest challenges is how the government can ensure the protection of critical infrastructures that are in the hands of the private companies. So we started to work with all of the stakeholders, introducing each other, presenting the problem, the challenge, trying to develop a common objective, and we developed all together in a consensus mode a roadmap for improving the industrial cybersecurity and critical infrastructure protection, including all of the stakeholders of my presentation, government regulators, operators, EPCs, vendors, industrial vendors, cybersecurity vendors, and we developed a roadmap for 5 years to improve the industrial cybersecurity, including establishing public-private partnerships, including analyzing new regulations, and all of that activities doing in a consensus mode. So the regulation is not coming from the top, as is, but all of the stakeholders are participating on the development of the regulation, if it's coming. And after that, we organize different knowledge teams, including and engaging different people, and of course, introducing the people, the humans, of the government, of the public bodies, to the ones in the private, presenting each other, right, trying to understand all of the issues. And the results nowadays is that in Spain and also in the Spanish-speaking world, in Latin America, we have a National Center for Critical Infrastructure Protection from the government, and the National Institute for Cybersecurity.
You have 10 seconds.
Yeah, okay. And we are working together with the private companies. New regulations are coming, but being developed in a consensus mode. And for me, honestly, it's a real success story because all of the stakeholders, by now, are happy.
Oh, that's good. Dr. Salah?
And again, that's very important thing here. I mean, taking the whole issue in order to provide, like, a solid and reliable systems, that's very important. And when you talk about, like, ICS, like industrial control system mainly, and defending those systems, it's very critical to identify the types of threats that we're facing. For example, you all remember in 2003, the blackout happened in North America. Well, the electricity, all the power was off. And we are talking about cyber defense here. That's one issue. But there is internal threats coming in. And I can classify one of them, what happened in North America, like state of New York, Ottawa, or Ontario and Canada, and New Hampshire, they have like a blackout, simply because the system failed. The system that operating the power plant failed, and the failure is just there was a line of code went into a loop. And that's, it's very well-known problem in operating systems. We call it race condition, though we could not defend it. I mean, the whole system failed because of this. So we need a clear identification to all these, issues in order to have the good scenarios to handle them.
Thank you so much. Actually, I have more questions, but there was a request that they want to give more opportunity for the audience. But my last question, but just please give me a short answer, as much as you can. So in your opinion, since all of you agreed that we don't have that collaboration and that level of coordination and transparency, so who should start? Should be equally, like each stakeholder, or should start from the governments or from the private sector? Just in a short.
See, I think collaborative effort But the starter should be the public sector, the government. They should rely, yeah,
to initiate such
like, you know, partnership in order to provide the good legislation, the regulations, and all this stuff.
All right, thank you. What about you, Joe? Who should start initiating those sort of initiatives?
Well, my view is that I was very impressed when I went down to Colombia in South America, where their electric utility sector actually organized their own forum to discuss the challenges that infrastructure arm faced, and actually proactively started creating their own internal processes to deal with cyber threats. So I actually think the lead's really going to come from the private sector. In the end, you all own the control systems, you own the vital assets, you own the infrastructure, and that means you own the risk. So I think the lead really will come from the private sector, and that, of course, the public sector is going to gain enormous value from that.
Right, that's explained because Sharhan is from the Middle East and you are from North America, so that's explained why you have two different answers, but it's very clear. Yes, Sam?
As I am in the middle, my answer is quite simple, that we have to start from both sides.
Okay.
And it's a reality, it's our case in Spain, right?
Yeah.
Because you have, and you need a top-down approach from the government, absolutely, it's completely needed, but that top-down approach should be aware of the real needs of the private sector. So in that way, the bottom-up approach, that is the ones that we made with the Industrial Service Security Center in Spain, and it's quite similar from the ISAGEN in Colombia and others, it's a real need. And having these both approaches, what we need is to make, I don't know, knowledge teams, working groups, forums, that both of the stakeholders,
So
public
it's a
and private,
mutual effort.
mutual effort, yeah.
And that's the reason why, Sam, I put you in the middle.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, gentlemen, I really enjoyed talking to you, learned a lot from different perspectives, but we'll give some opportunity for questions from the audience.
Sinclair, do you have a question? Which one?
Okay, so real quick comment.
First, is it specifically to any of the audience or for all of them?
Well, let's see what you think. So in the United States, we just went through a process with NIST to come up with a cybersecurity framework based on the president's order. And that was very much of a public-private partnership. And people are very happy with the framework. They think there's a lot of good stuff in it. But there's two things that people have been struggling with subsequent to that, and I'd be interested in what the panel thinks. First of all, incentives. People are looking for, well, give me some reason to be adopting this framework. And second of all, from the public side, the private side has to understand that the public side needs to see some sort of metrics that indicate that the framework is in fact being adopted, or any document,
right,
and that it's in fact helping. So in other words, I think for an effective partnership, both sides have to understand what the other side needs, right? The public side needs to be able to show that they're improving things so that the population believes in the government, and the private side needs some incentives in order to adopt maybe what they already want to do. So, I mean, what does the panel think about that?
Anybody want to start? Go ahead, Dr. Sam.
Well, thank you for this question, but let's remember that the need for the framework was the main driver behind it. And if we look at the driver, all those initiatives about cybersecurities and framework or bodies, let's say, or agencies, they happened directly after September 11 event, where we have the Homeland Security Department. They established what we call the CERT, which is the Computer Emergency readiness framework, and there is another agency which is the ICS, Industrial Cybersecurity CERT, and they starting proposing these frameworks. Before that, there was no clear framework to regulate this relationship. But the cybersecurity came directly after these events, and now we have clear departments, under the supervision of the Homeland Security Department, to following those. And this is what I meant by the infrastructure. In Kuwait or in the Middle East, we need such a thing. the main driver here is the development. Today, I mean, this is the future. We are going into the cloud computing. We are going to sharing the information. So we need a clear infrastructure in order to handle these. So we need something like this. That's a very important aspect of it.
Shireen, do we have time for?
No, unfortunately not.
Oh, I
Can I get a
apologize
huge
for
hand of
that.
applause, please, for our panelists? Dr. Salah, Ali, Samuel, and Joel,
Sorry
thank you
about
very, very much for your time.
So I was brought in to get us caught up a little bit on our timeline. So I'll do my best to get us back on track. So we're really talking about ICS. I know in the description we had IDS. I believe that was an earlier faux pas on my part, so my apologies. Really want to talk about some of the roles and the responsibilities around this, right? So a lot of this discussion so far in the conference has talked about where we are, some of the issues, some of the risks, and some of the problems that are out there. But we want to talk a little bit about the evolution of how that evolved, what some of the current challenges are, and then how do we manage those challenges? Because there's a lot of different models out there for managing the challenge with respect to responsibilities and roles within IT security. And so we want to understand that better and talk about some of those options, because we really think there's a gap in the marketplace for what is being addressed in this area. So let's talk a little bit about the evolution, right? And so certainly in the past, the ICS networks have been considered their own environment, right? And rightfully so. They've existed out in the field. They were run by operations. They were run by engineers. The IT folks didn't care much about it, okay? And that was okay because they were on physically disconnected networks. They were segregated. They had their own protocols, their own devices, and they weren't too similar with what IT was managing, right? And so they were hidden, if you will. No one really cared much about those. But over time, they've started to develop the same type of controls, the same type of technologies that you see on the enterprise network, right? And so that introduces some additional risk for us. So now you've got the same process control system that are running, web pages, VoIP traffic, P2P traffic, all in the same lines, very dissimilar from what it used to be many years ago. So let's talk about some of the challenges. Number one, the architecture has changed, right? Now we've got commercial off-the-shelf systems within ICS. These are systems with Windows already embedded. They've got databases built in with Oracle and with SQL, some of the common systems you find over on the enterprise network on the IT side, right? Now, a lot of these systems come with web browsers, right? And with the web applications. Sometimes those are turned on automatically, sometimes not, but they're there and certainly represent a risk potential for us. And then all the same networking equipment with respect to the switches and the routers and the firewalls. It's looking very similar on the ICS side as it always has on the IT enterprise side. So those two worlds are starting to merge a whole lot more than what they had in the past. It's really complexed by the fact that we're starting to connect those environments, right? So where this hidden network existed in the past, now it's being connected into the corporate environment, which represents a lot of risks, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. The other component is that all these ICS systems are now IP-based, right? So you've got the old protocols that are wrapped in TCP and UDP. You've got every piece of equipment that's coming already with Ethernet ports on it or with Wi-Fi capabilities. All right, so again, very similar to what we're seeing on the IT side. So when you introduce the common systems, the IP connectivity, and the pure connectivity across the organization, you get a lot more security risks than what we had previously in the ICS environment. Take a look at all these additional risks that you're exposed to. Some of these already existed in the ICS environment, but certainly not all of them, right? So now we've got to worry about worms and viruses and which ports and services are being turned on. If you've got OpenFTP running, all the password management controls. And you may have done that to an extent already on ICS, but now it's much greater importance because of the accessibility that you now have that you didn't previously. So now we've got our ICS network connected through the firewalls into the enterprise network, which is connected through firewalls to the rest of the organization and ultimately out to the internet. Now, at Protiviti, we do a lot of internal and external hacking, right? Our clients hire us to hack in from the outside, from the inside, to test the configuration of this setup. I can tell you from doing many of these types of hacks that we can get in very often from the outside and almost always often from the inside, okay? And so if we come in and we start doing an evaluation, you know, we had a client that we went out into the field. They had a remote field unit. We plugged into the Ethernet port to see how far we could see into the enterprise. They didn't have any controls in place to be able to prevent us from going this way back into the corporate network. So we had a guy out in the field get all the way back into the enterprise just from plugging into the remote unit, okay? As we plugged in there and came out this way, they actually had some pretty good controls. We couldn't get all the way out, but certainly going this way, they hadn't really thought about the layering and the controls that needed to be in place. Certainly represents a risk, right? And if we come in from the inside, you know, it's almost game over before we start. So typically when we do an internal evaluation, we do it from two different perspectives. We say we're going to try and hack in from the standpoint of an employee, and then we say we're going to try and hack in from the standpoint of a contractor. Both represent significant risks for you and your organization, right? And so if we come in from the standpoint of an employee, we say, give us one of your hardened pieces of hardware of your laptops that you would typically issue to an employee. Give that to us and let us see if we can load our tools on it. Let us see if we can do our scans, and let's see if you can detect us, okay? If we do it from a contractor's point of view, we'll say we'll use our own laptop that we bring in, and we'll run our scans and see if you can detect us that way. 99% of the time, we can gain full access from the inside of the network. And that's really just because of the architecture of Microsoft and the vulnerabilities that are inherent there, okay? So this connectivity, we talked about all the different risks on the prior slide that it represents. It is a huge concern because now if you can get access from the internet, from the outside, and get all the way to this control system, you've got big problems, right? And from our experience in taking a look at this, it's not being managed well. There are some good controls in place along the way, but trying to do it across a large organization requires a lot of very mature processes. I'll give one more example. We just did an evaluation for a large multinational based in Houston. They got operations here in the Middle East and all around the world. Okay, they've got about 50,000 employees in their company. We've done this assessment for them to try and hack in from the outside for the last 4 years. This will be our 5th year. And every year, they get a little bit better. They take our recommendations, they put them in, they make themselves more mature, and it makes it harder for us to get in the following year. Just as you would expect, just as you would hope, right? So it increases our challenge. This last year when we went in and did our evaluation, you know, we were saying, it's a good thing, it's a bad thing. It's great, they've got some great controls. We were having a hard time finding an access point in. We did, though, because someone in the UK, one person, set up a database, put it externally facing towards the internet, and didn't change the default credentials on that database. It was a wide open way for us to get in, use the default credentials for that database, gain access to that system, and then escalate our privileges from there. We just needed one hole, and that guy provided it. The company overall had very good controls, right? They had good processes, but one person didn't do what they were supposed to do, and they put an unhardened system open to the internet. So again, it increases the complexity the larger the corporation, the more geographic areas in which you operate, and the more connection points you have to the internet. Challenge number 2, management's expectations have changed. So tell me if any of this sounds familiar. Real-time information and reports, management wants these things. Real-time information, access to information from anytime, anywhere. Right? You get your request from management, they want to see management level reports on their phone at midnight. Right? Ability to import data into other applications. Seamless integration of data into data warehouses for reporting. We see this a lot, especially from ICS environments. They want 100% uptime. Oh, and by the way, they want 100% assurance that information is appropriately protected. You see any conflicts in there? Can you have 100% uptime and 100% security? Possibly, but what if you've got limited funds? Which one do you come down on? Now it starts to say, well, who's making the decision? What department are you in? Right? Who wins that war? That's a little bit about what we want to talk about because it creates a conflict. Challenge number 3. This has been mentioned a lot throughout the conference. I won't go deep into this, but the complexity and the breadth of the security tasks for ICS has clearly changed. Right? You've got complex environments. You've got patching that's got to be done. You've got system configuration. You've got authentication you've got to consider. You've got systems that are historic out into the plants and the ICS systems being merged with brand new equipment that's out there, right? So it's a lot to manage. It is a complex environment. Each system has its own unique vulnerabilities that are unique to it, right? And so it's a lot to consider. So when we go through and we make recommendations about what needs to be put in place after we do our assessments, this is a sample of some of the things that you might expect to see, right? And this is by no means an all-inclusive list, but you need policies, procedures, firewall rules, you need authentication, you need personnel with elevated privileges limited, you need to make sure ports and services are connected, you need to make all these different things, right? Each one of these needs to be a very defined process, right? You may or may not have technology enabling the management of some of this, but one thing you need to make sure is that it's a well-defined process and that it works well.